All the myths you've heard about engine tuning are about to get busted. When it comes to extracting more power out of your common rail turbo diesel engine, it's one of the hottest topics with our audience, and that's why I'm here today at Ultimate Diesel Tuning with Rob. We've had stacks of questions come in about warranties, about fuel economies, performance, drivability, how it goes off-road towing, you name it. There's so many questions, which we've got Rob here today from Ultimate Diesel Tuning. We're going to go through all of your questions and answer them, and even put this D-Max to the test. First off, we're going to tackle the biggest question we've received. Does the tune make fuel economy worse? Well, to put this to the test, I've got a stock D-Max with a 2.5 tonne caravan on the back. We're going to fill it to the brim with fuel, drive 180 kilometres in a combination of city and highway driving, then fill it up again and check fuel consumption. It's also going to be a good test of how the car handles and drives. Then Rob's going to tune it and I'll do the exact same test to prove if fuel economy really does get better or worse. And after this, we've got plenty more questions to answer and myths to bust, so make sure you stick around right until the end. Right, the first step is, this is our start point, the fuel station. So we're going to actually fill this D-Max right to the top, the first click, and then that'll give us a good starting point to do the fuel economy test. Just pulled out from the fuel station, and the first impressions are, like, the D-Max does tow this 2.5 tonne van reasonably well, but on takeoff it is a bit sluggish. I mean, it'll be interesting to see the difference when it does have the tune in it. But for now, we'll see how it goes through a bit of traffic. Then our plan is to get up on the highway, and we're actually going to do a couple hundred kilometres. It's a good test once you get the van on the back, because you really start to test the limits of the vehicle. The biggest drama I find is the automatic gearbox with a load on the back seems to be hunting through the gears a little bit, especially when you get a little bit of incline. You start to put a bit of load on that motor, it just doesn't know which gear it needs to be in. We're into a nice little mountain range at the moment, and as soon as you start to go through some of these steep inclines, you really get a feeling that that van is a huge big dead weight on the vehicle. Now the vehicle can do it, there's no doubt about it, but it's a real struggle. It's putting a fair bit of load on everything. The engine starts revving, then it drops down in revs, then back up. It's hunting through the gears at the moment. So I'm on a bit of an incline towing this van. It doesn't really have the torque to hold the gear when you're going up those hills, so it hunts through the revs and therefore changes gears every couple of seconds, and it's making for a, I don't know, not the most comfortable driving experience, because the vehicle doesn't know where it is, and I reckon it'll be using more fuel as well. The first lap is done, and after driving 180 kilometres, we've made it back to the fuel station. Turns out we used 25.13 litres of fuel, costing us $49.48. That works out to be about 14 litres per 100. Time to get the vehicle tuned and see what kind of a difference it can make. Alright, the big D-Max has been tuned now, it's got the van back on, and we're about to go and do our test lap once again. Let's see how it goes. There's no doubt about it. First impressions of the tuned D-Max, I certainly feel it's got a lot more power, especially in the torque department. It just rolls on that throttle a lot easier and gets up to speed without trying to wring its neck off. So I find myself actually lowering the rev range when I'm towing than I did before. Now I've had a chance to muck around on a few of these hills on the freeway. What I think you'll notice is it's holding gears compared to the untuned D-Max. It's holding its gears a lot longer, it's not hunting through, and the revs are staying quite even. So that sort of tells me that the vehicle's got a lot more torque and therefore can hold the gear without having to change. Overall though, it's a lot nicer to drive, there's no doubt about that. According to the trip computer on the D-Max, I'm using well over a litre, probably about 1.3 litres per 100 less with the tune. So the driving experience is better, I'm using less fuel. If you're thinking, well, you can't always trust those fuel computers, you're right, you absolutely can't. But we're actually starting and stopping our journey at a fuel station, so we're recording how many Ks we put into each tank, tuned and untuned, and then we work out the kilometres and do it properly as well. So we're going to have both the actual reading and the trip computer reading, so we'll be able to see for sure if it's using less fuel with the tune, which will be quite surprising. Well, the two runs, untuned and tuned, were pretty much the same, except this last little bit we're running into a fair bit of traffic, so we're going a lot slower, and probably our fuel consumption is going to hurt a little bit more on the tuned run. But either way, it'll be interesting to see how we go. The overall drivability of the tuned vehicle was so much better than the untuned, so much nicer to drive. It had the power, it means you didn't need to think as much on the road, you could just drive with peace of mind. So fuel figures will be interesting. First click, go. Let's actually use less fuel. On the second lap of the 180 Ks, we used 23.24 litres of fuel, costing us $45.76. That works out to be about 12.9 litres to the 100. Compare these numbers to the first trip and you can see a big difference. If we go off the fact that the average Australian drives about 13,000 kilometres a year, this vehicle will be saving about 143 litres. That's pretty incredible considering this tuned D-Max also has more power. And if this vehicle was being used for touring, I'm sure it'd be doing many more kilometres and saving a lot more fuel. Time to go back to Rob to tell him our findings, as well as getting him to bust a few more engine tuning myths. Well, Rob, that was amazing, mate. I've got to say, with the tune, obviously it had a lot more power. It was a lot easier to drive. I noticed it especially on those hills. I wasn't hunting as much. But the kicker is, mate, obviously we did the fuel economy test. Believe it or not, after the tune, the vehicle used less fuel.
Mate, it's pretty common. You know, the feedback we get, especially with customers who have been towing, is they see that there's an improvement in fuel economy. But the reason for that is, if you're putting your foot down, you're not actually having to put your foot down as far to get that momentum to get you up to speed. And that's the reason why we see those improvements. 5 to 10% in fuel economy. I don't know, how did it go? Yeah, look, it drove really well. Like I said, I tried to maintain the same driving style on untuned and tuned. Yes. And the result is a lot nicer driving with the tune and I use less fuel. So that's a win-win in my opinion. Good outcome.
Just keep in mind that while we save fuel with the tune, not everyone will see the same result. During the test, we tried to drive the D-Max the same, with and without the tune. But if you're inclined to be a little bit heavy on the accelerator and want to use all that extra power you've got with your tune, of course you're going to use more fuel. It's also common for people to get other upgrades like canopies and bigger tyres around the same time they tune their vehicle, which might negate the fuel savings. But back to back in our test, with the same vehicle and the same conditions, we did see a fuel consumption difference with a tune four-wheel drive. Does a tune affect a vehicle's warranty or servicing? Now the short answer is no. And Rob, why is that, mate?
Yeah, look, Shauno, I think one thing to really highlight here is we're not trying to tune outside of the factory parameters of the ECU. We're keeping all the safety and reliability of the ECU, so if there is any concerns with the vehicle, the ECU has that protection there. As well as that, we're not trying to tune these cars into V8 supercars. Yeah. You know, we're trying to make them safe and reliable with the nice gains and changing that drivability with improvement in torque down low and obviously through the mid-range as well.
And the way I understand it as well, if there was an issue with the vehicle, the dealer or the manufacturer would have to actually prove that it was the tune that caused it.
Yeah, so Sean, exactly the same with any other modifications you do to the vehicle. The dealer has to prove that those modifications have caused damage to your tail shaft from bigger wheels or suspension. It's the same with the engine. If the manufacturer has to prove that the tune was the cause of the damage to the vehicle, and what we're doing here is we're doing it safe and reliable.
That makes good sense, Rob. Now, what if I own this D-Max here and it's still well in its warranty period, I've taken it back to Isuzu and they've somehow managed to wipe the ECU, lost my tune, what happens then?
Big question, mate. We get it a lot, and it's a good one. The good thing about with what we do when we custom dyno tune all the vehicles, we actually store the original file, for say as an example for this Isuzu, before we tuned it, and we also save the custom dyno tune that we've done for this vehicle, and we link it back to obviously the registration and the VIN number of that car. So if that does happen, you don't have to worry. We've actually got the file here and bring it back in and we can sort that all out for the customer.
Should I remove my DPF? Now before we dive too much into this one, folks, the short answer is no. You never need to remove your DPF. In fact, your DPF is obviously a really important part of your exhaust system, and doing that is going to create environment problems, not to mention the fines you can get can be in the thousands of dollars.
I think the other thing to highlight is about the performance. That's a big question, like removing my DPF, am I going to get better performance upgrades? And the answer is no to that. You know, are you going to damage your DPF by getting it tuned? No, you're not at all. The big reason we see DPFs clogging up is they're throwing heaps of fuel in down low and it's just not getting burnt off properly. It fills up and blocks the DPF off. The other big thing by doing that, you also see the vehicle run a lot hotter. Ensuring we're getting the right air-fuel ratios when we're tuning them ensures the protection for your DPF and ensures the longevity for your engine as well.
Can't you just copy and paste the same tune from the same four-wheel drive and save money? So if only it was that simple. Take this D-Max for example, say the owner had a slightly different intercooler, maybe a different turbo. It's going to be a lot different to tune than a stock one of these, right?
Yeah, it is, Sean. Like those modifications, if it had different injectors or it had different intercooler, those things definitely make a big difference. But the funny thing is, all vehicles are not the same. You know, we've had examples of where two guys have come in, had exactly the same car and bought them from the same dealership. One comes in and the standard got 5 to 7 kilowatts different to the other one. Same tune goes in every car from the manufacturer, but the difference is when we're custom dyno tuning, we're actually refining that tune and also taking into consideration the modifications that are on the vehicle and also what they're using the vehicle for. So you get the better outcome and you're getting the desired results to improve that all-round drivability and better torque.
That's an interesting point you make. So no two four-wheel drives are the same. Even the same make and model, they might run up different on the dyno, therefore they need to be custom tuned. Now say, we get this a lot of questions coming about this. Say you've got this Isuzu, you might have put a performance upgrade on it like an intercooler. Should it get tuned after that?
Yeah, it's a really good example, especially say on a vehicle like this. The intercooler might be say 40% larger in volume. What we see then is the actual air-fuel ratios go a lot leaner. And what happens in that case with say the D-Max is it actually runs a bit doughier because the car's running leaner than it was from factory. Sometimes you might hear people saying, oh, I've got an engine code come on now. It's because obviously the ECU doesn't recognise those changes you've done. But to maximise the benefits of putting like that exhaust system on, getting a tune is where you see the big gains.
Just get a chip tune. They're cheaper and do the same thing.
Firstly, that's a big no. And in most cases, some chips are actually more expensive than getting a custom dyno tune. The other thing about a chip, you're actually piggybacking off the ECU and you're tricking the ECU into getting the wrong signals from the sensors. With a lot of the chips on the market, they are increasing the fuel to the rail pressure, increasing fuel to the engine, and with more fuel going to the engine, we see an increase in heat, and that's a disaster.
So I guess getting a custom tune is a little bit more complex than just plug and play with a chip.
Yeah, so there's a number of parameters we're looking at. We're looking at injector duration. We're obviously looking at the fueling like we spoke about through that process, but also looking at the boost and a heap of other parameters to ensure that we get the right outcome for what your vehicle's been used for, as well as what modifications have been done to that vehicle.
There's some of the biggest myths of engine tuning covered, but what other questions have you guys got? Put them down below so we can answer them with some expert help from the Ultimate Diesel Tuning team. That's all I've got for today, so thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time on 4Wheel Drive 24/7.